Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer, in that order. Welcome everyone. Question and answers, round 3. Let's jump right in. We'll start with one sent in by Rye, who wrote, I became a fan of cards in the mid to late 1990s as a kid and have noticed some changes in the hobby that still have me scratching my head. When did veterans become part of the base checklist? As a kid, they were head coaches and checklist cards that were part of those sets, but those made sense. I don't understand why there are Karl Malone cards or Scottie Pippen cards in modern sets when there were more than plenty of cards produced to these players during their playing days. Yeah, so I don't remember exactly when that started. I want to say the early 2000s it started happening here and there where retired players would be in sets, and then it became much more prevalent sort of in the 2010s. And it makes sense because in, like, say, 1990, cards were targeted at kids. They were kids' products, so the kids wanted to see the modern players, and that's all they really cared about. But today, cards are more targeted at adults, 30-year-olds, 30s, 40s, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds. And a lot of these people remember players from their past and love to get, for example, me, I love to get a Cal Ripken card in a modern product, even though he's been retired for 20 years. So that's sort of the reason for it. Next question sent in by Chris, who wrote, in 2004, I bought a box of Sweet Shot basketball. I was able to pull this LeBron James rookie auto short print numbered to only 49. My question that ties to this is, why do you think that this card is worth and sells for so much less than other LeBron rookies in the same set that are numbered even higher? So I'm not actually familiar with this card or its value or other cards from this sets and their value, but, to sort of guess at your question, a couple things here. It's a very cool card, obviously, rookie auto of LeBron, but there's two sort of things that sort of work against it. One is the autograph is on a baseball. That's sort of very, very quirky idea. I think most people would rather have the autograph on a basketball or just on the card itself than like a random baseball for a basketball player. And secondly, the photo of LeBron here is like super tiny. You can barely even see it, and it's not really inspiring. Whereas, most LeBron collectors are probably going to want a cool in-action shot or a closer-up shot or bigger photo of LeBron on their card. So I would guess that those two things sort of work against it in terms of its value compared to other cards from the set. Next one sent in by Bobby, who I recently purchased one of my Grails, a 1968 Nolan Ryan rookie in a PSA Authentic slab. I plan on cracking out of the slab and sending it off to him for a paid signing. I want to get it reslabbed with his autograph authenticated and the card graded. From the scans, the card appears to be miscut, but I'm curious if PSA would actually give it a grade, even if it's a low grade. I mostly just don't want to waste the time for them to send it back in that dreaded cardboard sandwich. So unfortunately, I really don't know what PSA would do with this if you cracked it out, had it autographed, and then resubmitted it. I would need to sort of see it in person to sort of make a best guess on that. I mean, they might just call it authentic again. They might not grade it because of size issues, or they might give it a number grade. They might give it a number grade with a qualifier, 5MC or something. Those are sort of all in play. So it's sort of up to you as to if that's a gamble worth taking. Next question was sent in by Corey, who wrote, how do you determine a fair price for a low pop graded card? I have some 90s inserts I had graded that have only been graded 1 or 2 times total because of scarcity, but I have no idea what a good market value would be. I can't even find comps for other players to find a starting point. Yeah, so there is no sort of good, obvious way to do this. What you're doing is basically what I would recommend. Do your best. See if you can find a comp that is somewhat similar, somebody from the same set or a similar set or another card of the player, from the same year with a similar serial number. These sort of things, just the best you can do. Often you won't be able to find anything, and you're just sort of making a best guess. With cards like this, I tend to set prices really, really high because you just don't know how much demand there is for them, or if there's way more demand than the pop 3 that exists or whatever. So I set it real high, and if no offers or no bids come in, it doesn't sell, then I just lower the price little by little until eventually it does. The other Mike Trout asked, looking back over the last decade or so of Panini's basketball card run, are there any sets or insert sets you think will be viewed as special or nostalgic? 90s collectors love PMGs, Skybox, EX sets, and so many others. What will collectors of this era hold in the same regard? Yeah, good question, and I wish I knew if I could see into the future that way. That would be really easy to invest in cards, but probably the sets that are popular today will have nostalgic value in the future on some level, especially the sets that are not way over printed, kabooms and downtowns, things like that. But sort of beyond that, your guess is basically as good as mine. Next one was sent in by Michael, who wrote, do you tend to list less of each sport as they enter their off-season? Would it be worth it to take down football cards from whatever platform you're using and relist them in August or September? Or is the price difference not significant enough to warrant this? Yeah, so for the most part, I really don't do this. A very, very small percentage of my inventory will I do something like this for, but for the most part, no. The price difference isn't going to change much on most of the cards that I deal with, which is, I don't focus much on ultra modern. With ultra modern cards, this sort of thing would probably be a lot more relevant because prices tend to go up and down along with the seasons on ultra modern cards and active players, and especially young active players. But most of what I deal in is vintage, 80s, 90s. I have some ultra modern, but for the most part, I don't really pay that close attention to it, but a little bit. Next question was sent in by Dale, who wrote, is it just me, or do others have more of an attachment to cards that you have personally had graded? I think it is the detailed evaluation and the process of submitting a card that fosters additional connection to a card. Oh yeah, I never really thought of that, but that makes sense. Yeah, the more time you've sort of interacted with a card and spent the time to grade it and go over it and all that process, maybe the more of an attachment you may have to it. Charlie asked, what are your thoughts on print lines? I buy a lot of PSA 9, Tom Brady, refractor, and prisms. The photos can look good on eBay and PSA website, but when the card arrives, you see it in person for the first time, it has a notable print line. Most sellers won't accept returns, and I feel there is no need to point it out because it's still technically a PSA 9. A common response is if you want a perfection, buy a 10. So now you're stuck with a card you don't want, and there is a morally gray area of reselling it without disclosing the imperfection or mentioning it in the description and taking a loss. Do you think grading companies should adopt a print line PL qualifier? So I personally am not a fan of qualifiers. I think they're kind of arbitrary, and you can grade a card perfectly fine without them. And the hobby's sort of going away from qualifiers anyway, so I don't think that's going to be something that we see in the future. Print lines, they never really bother me. They sort of, I think the grading companies handle them right. You knock a point or two off, depending on how significant the print line is, and yeah, that's sort of what I think it should be. In regards to should sellers disclose that? I mean, I would sort of side with the seller on this. If a card is in a holder. It's a PSA 9. That's generally, I think, enough to just list that, and it's not really on the seller to sort of disclose, why it got a 9 or why it got an 8. That would sort of be overkill if we sort of required all sellers to do that with all graded cards. So I don't really think that's something to require. If this is a big concern of yours, I would only buy from sellers who accept returns, or ask ahead of time. You send them an email and say, hey, is there a print line on this card, and that would sort of be the ways around that. Nick asked, if you're submitting cards at different levels of grading, do you put them all in the same order, or do you separate submissions? Do you separate vintage from modern? So if you're submitting cards at different levels, then no, you have to do 2 separate submissions, or however many different levels you're using. You can't put them all in one submission. And regarding separating vintage from modern, well, if you're using PSA at certain levels, they require you to separate vintage from modern. The other companies don't. So with PSA, I do when I have to, and with the others, I don't. Next question is from Jason, who would have been a collector for a couple of decades and cannot figure out what all the small print on the back of the cards means. For a few years now, relic cards state the memorabilia contained on this card is not from any specific game, event, or season. I believe these to be generic jerseys that a player never saw, let alone touched or worn a game. To make things more confusing is when I've seen some cards during the 2000s. Below is a snapshot from a Mickey Mantle 2008 Topps Triple Threads. As you can see, it states it's an authentic game-used relic cards of Mickey Mantle, but then immediately beneath it, it states this relic contained on the card are not from any specific game, event, or season. What is your thought? Is this just a junk, or did Mickey actually wear this jersey, but Topps is uncertain as to when it was worn? Yeah, so I did an entire video on this and just how vague these descriptions can be, and how you're basically just left guessing as to what's actually going on. The more modern it gets, the worse it gets. It started off in the early 2000s. It was very descriptive, and you knew exactly what relic you were looking at. And now today you have no idea when you read the back. And here's sort of an in-between your example. There's an authentic game-used relic card of Mickey Mantle. The relic contained on this card is not from any specific game. I would interpret this as that, yeah, this was a jersey worn by Mickey Mantle in an official Major League Baseball game, but they don't know which one. There's no records of that. That's sort of how I would interpret it, although I don't even know that for sure. Next question from Matthew Elliott wrote, what are your 5 or 10 weirdest Cal Ripken Jr. cards in your PC? And Brady Dog asked, as far as your Cal Ripken cards, can you show us 1, your most prized, 2, your most valuable, and 3, the rarest? Oh yeah, so actually quite a few people asked about my Ripken PC, so I'll do a video on that at some point in the not so distant future, just going over it in its entirety. Next question was from Sean, and I had what I think is an interesting approach to selling my cards at shows. I'm a budget collector and never set up, but I typically buy lower priced cards, $5 to $50 from tables with good pricing. I've noticed that some dealers will have the same cards I buy, for sometimes 2 to 3 times what I paid. I glance at these tables and then just move on when I'm buying. But at a recent show, I decided to use these high-priced dealers as a selling opportunity. I went up to them with cards in the ballpark of what they were selling and asked them if they were buying. A few did buy from me at the prices they were pretty much on par with what I had paid for the cards from another dealer, or higher. The higher prices prevent them from trying to lowball me, since I can point to similar cards in their cases as examples. I felt this was a good way to sell cards at a show without taking the 15 to 30% haircut that a dealer needs to resupply inventory. What do you think? Do you have any tips for selling at shows when you're not set up as a dealer but want to optimize your price? That's interesting. I would not think that would sort of work in any sort of big picture sense. You might find an exception here and there where that works out, but I don't think that would. I don't think that's like a strategy you could consistently employ. But I mean, if you were able to make it work and can continue to do so, all power to you, of course. I would just say, if you're selling cards to a dealer at a show, you don't expect full value. It's not reasonable to expect full value. And if you want to get full value out of your cards, you have to sell them yourself. That's the whole, point of a dealer, right? They're doing the hard work selling. So if you want to get full value, you got to do the hard work selling on eBay or, on Facebook or whatever platform you want to use. But if you want full value, you have to sell them yourself. Selling to a dealer, you're not going to get full value. There's really no exceptions to that. I mean, if you have like a truly elite card that a dealer thinks they can get over full value for, maybe they'll pay you full value, but that's going to be a rare exception. Next question sent in by Matt, who wrote, I just wanted to get your opinion on sending in my PC collection to PSA. I've been collecting what I believe to be high-grade raw cards for my collection for years now. With this, I'm only asking about sending in cards of one player at a time. I would like to send in roughly 50 to 75 cards of the same player, Adley Rushman, and I'm concerned about this. Is it best to mix it and match a few different players at once, or is a single player okay? Your thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I think you're okay to send it all in at once. I mean, in theory, you could get just a really strict grader that day, and in that case, if you wanted to protect yourself, you could, split it up into multiple submissions. But, for the most part, I think you're okay to send it in all at once. Next question sent in by Adam, wrote, as a longtime collector who occasionally sells cards, I often find myself with some really nice cards left over of Hall of Famers or almost Hall of Fame players from various sports. When I'm looking through things I might want to sell, I look at some of them as though there's a shelf life or a half-life, with the idea, will people remember this player from the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s? And how much longer before the market is like one or two people? My question isn't specifically about those players or cards, but is more about that mindset. Is that something you think about when you make a purchase? I partially ask because even though I'm only 40, my stay off my lawn take is fearful that people don't care, or the people who do are fewer and farther between. Younger generations aren't aware of the history of some of the cards or players, with so much of the content being consumed by today's youth on YouTube, TikTok, and other digital mediums, and only seems to be desire and demand for instant gratification style content and the ultra-modern next big rookie or GOAT chase from old products. Yeah, I think about that, but not so much when I'm like buying a collection. It's more so when I'm like deciding what cards would be good long-term holds, like as semi-investments. Because what you're saying is right. Players who don't ultimately reach all-time great status, they're just sort of in the very, very good category. Their notoriety generally fades significantly over time. But that takes a really long time to play out, like many, many, many years. It's not something to really worry about in the short term. In regards to like kids today being too obsessed with active players, I think that's the case with every generation. I think in any year you go back to, the kids that year were focused on current players, the young current players especially. They didn't really know about the history of the game. They didn't appreciate the older veterans, even the active older veterans at the time. And then over time, as they grow up, they start to appreciate that more and more, and especially, players from their era. I'm a perfect example. My favorite era is the 80s and 90s, not because that was like the best era. That's just the era that I was a kid in. So, and I appreciate that era the most. And I think that's just sort of the natural cycle of things. I don't think that's like unique to today. Scott Patterson 80 asked, I came across this grading company Facebook page called FCG, and occasionally they share some vintage cards that they've graded on their social media. I've attached a few Babe Ruth cards they graded, and I'm curious on your thoughts if these cards are authentic. So I actually don't really know much about FCG. I mean, I've heard of them, but I've never owned one of their cards, and they're not considered credible by, the majority of the hobby at the moment. They may be one day, but at the moment they are not. I don't see anything in these pictures that tell me these are fakes, but, they very well could be, and I personally would not, take a chance on buying these as original unless, I was very, very confident in the seller and knew them very well, and they had a really, really strong reputation. But yeah, otherwise I would sort of stay away from something like this. Next one is from Denny, who wrote, I'm a collector who is looking to start a small business selling sports cards. My current inventory is all my cards from my collection that would be better in other collectors' hands. I have sold a small amount on eBay, and I'm setting up at a card show on February 17th. My question to you is, what is the best way to source inventory? I've looked through eBay and Facebook Marketplace with little to no luck. It's very cool to hear. I hope everything goes well. I hope your card show went well on the 17th. When you're starting off as a dealer or just as a small card, side business, the hardest aspect is finding inventory to buy. By far, that's the hardest. Selling has become much easier, lots of outlets to sell, but finding inventory is always tough. It's sort of a hustle. Just the more things you kind of try, the better. eBay, Facebook, yard sales, card show. If you set up at card shows, be very open to buying from people who walk up to your table, this sort of thing. And the more people you can sort of let know in your local area that you're an active buyer, the better. Just the more people who know that, the more likely one of them will lead to something to you to buy. Next one comes from Matthew, who wrote, in your experience, could you tell me the best success you've had selling near mint 1970s baseball commons and minor stars? Greg Morris, COMC, or other recommendations? So 1970s near mint commons, I really need to know more specifically what you have, like the years and just how high grade they are to truly advise. But in a general sense, I would say that's probably not quite Greg Morris stuff. If it's like early 70s and it's like pack fresh, then yeah, that would be good Greg Morris stuff. But if it's not quite pack fresh, or if it's late 70s, I would say no. Don't send that to Greg Morris. There's no company that's good to sell those individually. COMC, I would say, is not a good option, just because there's going to be so many copies of the cards on the site already. Personally, if I had a bunch of near mint 70s cards, I would make lots for eBay and sell them on eBay as big lots. Peter had two questions. First, my understanding is that you did a heavy eBay business before you moved to Europe. Did you have any tricks for organizing your inventory to ensure you didn't lose or misplace anything? Obviously, storing by set or player is the primary method, but did you have any redundancies in place to try to prevent accidentally storing a card incorrectly? Asking for a friend. Two, I've noticed a slowdown in eBay sales in my store that extended beyond the normal holiday lull. I had a momentary increase in sales around the Hall of Fame vote, but not the normal steady increase leading up to spring training I've seen the past 2 years. Have you noticed something similar? Trying to figure out if it's an industry-wide thing or just me. Yeah, so at one point in 2015 or 16 or so, I had about 100,000 listings on eBay. I had a program that allowed you to upload a lot of cards all at once. And now the vast majority of them were 99 cents, and they were, just commons and stuff. So, but I ultimately did not, like that business model. But obviously, when you have 100,000, cards listed on eBay, you got to stay very organized. And I just basically used sport, year, brand, and that basically got the job done. So if I needed to find a 1997 donruss Fred McGriff, I went to baseball, 1997 donruss, and then thumbed through the cards there until I found the Fred McGriff. And yeah, that worked very well for me. Regarding your second question, have I noticed a lull in sales? I personally have not. Chances are it's just sort of the regular up and down. Any individual company will see random sort of up and downs just based on randomly who decides to make purchases that day or week or month or whatever. And it's often not tied to the industry as a whole in any way. Lou wrote, in a lot of cards I recently purchased, I came across a 2001 Futera Platinum World Series First Class Zinedine Zidane in excellent condition. When I went looking for comps, I had a hard time finding sales of the card. There are a couple of sale on COMC for $20 at the time of writing. When I checked the PSA Pop report, the card has only been graded twice, 1 in 8 and 1 in 9. I think I might have a PSA 8, and if I had the card graded, my question is, what would you do in a situation like this to maximize resale value? I'm not that experienced with soccer cards, but I noticed Zidane was a top player in his time and has recently been a high-profile manager. Is it better to grade a card from a rare set to have one of a handful of graded copies to seek out that Zidane collector to pay well, or will I just be sitting on this card for way too long trying to find a buyer for a graded copy? So it's sort of a 50-50 call, in my opinion, really up to you based on how much risk you want to take in the card world. I'm not familiar with this card. I'm not familiar with the Zidane market very well at all. I don't know if there would be a market for this card graded or not. I mean, it's possible that, you have one of only 3 graded copies and there's a Zidane collector who would happily pay really high for it. And it's also possible that nobody cares and you just would never find a buyer. I don't know how that would play out. This doesn't strike me as a particularly notable card of his. It's not like an early year card, sort of mid-career card, I think. So I'm really not sure, but I personally probably would not bother grading it. But I think if you chose to go that way, that would be a reasonable choice as well. 2 questions from Scott. He wrote, you've acquired a lot of collections, large and small, over your card dealing career. Can you share a few examples of stumbling across any unexpected treasures while going through them, the sorting process? And 2, long-term storage. What are your recommendations for how to store cards long-term? What have you used? What do you like, not like? Any watch-outs like temperature, moisture, causing eventual greening over time? Yeah, there's been lots of sort of hidden gems found buried in large collections over the years. Although actually, I think it happens a lot less frequently than people think. You know, the vast majority of large collections do not have any sort of hidden gems buried in them. But yeah, once in a while you find them. And for me, usually that's found in vintage with grading, and buy a large collection of cards from the '60s, and thousands and thousands of cards, and thumbing through them after you've bought them, thumbing through them, and find a Bob Gibson, and it's like, oh wow, that's really really sharp. I'll send that to PSA. It comes back a 9, and suddenly you have a $700 card that you hadn't accounted for. The Bob Gibson actually happened to me somewhat recently, and so it's usually that sort of thing where there's like a hidden gem found in a collection for me personally at least. But regarding your second question, long-term storage, I mean, pretty straightforward. Like keep them in a dark place when you're not looking at them. Make sure that temperature is reasonable, not too hot, not too cold, and make sure it's not like moist or damp type of thing. And last one's a fun one, sent in by Farronero. We all know about your love for Cal Ripken, vintage and high-grade rookies, but I was hoping to do a quick rapid fire so we could peel back the onion layers of Chris Sewall a little bit more. Kobe or LeBron, if you're asking who's the better player, LeBron. Card Saver or Ultra Pro, they're both good. I use them both. I probably use Card Saver more for no particular reason. Nachos or garlic fries, we'll go nachos. Led Zeppelin or Rush, we'll go Led Zeppelin. 90-10 centering or small surface wrinkle, I tend to be a surface guy, so I'd probably take the off-centered card, although 90-10 is pretty bad. I'd have to see the cards to answer that for specifically. Pete Rose or Alex Rodriguez, if you're asking who's the better player, Alex Rodriguez. Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune, it's a toss-up. We'll go Jeopardy. Tom Seaver or Nolan Ryan, if you're asking who's the better player, Tom Seaver, I think, was the better pitcher. Terminator or Alien, yeah, those are both good. We'll go Terminator. DH or pitchers hitting, I'd probably pick pitchers hitting. I tend to like the in-game strategy of baseball more so than needing like lots of runs. Donruss or Fleer, it's close. I'll go Fleer. I think they got more creative in the 90s, and chocolate or vanilla, easily chocolate. But that's it. Thank you everyone for all the great questions. And if anyone feels like I didn't answer their question completely, or they weren't sure about something I said, feel free to leave it in the comments, and I'll be happy to follow up and clarify anything. But really appreciate it, and we'll see you all again next time. Thanks everyone.